Hey, what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Conner O'Gara. Will, oh my gosh, it is Diego Pavia's world, and we're just living in it.
What an absolute king. We're already in the conversation for best post-game interview of all time.
All time.
All sports.
Humankind, not just limited to college football, but the raw emotion that Alyssa Lang captured after basically like sprinting to catch that dude down.
I'm surprised she was able to do it. Alabama couldn't.
I mean, good point, Will. Good one. First of many. Will's on one today. We're recording this very, very early. 8 o'clock, having just stayed up until 2:30 to watch that wild Miami Cal game.
Sponsored by the Mafia.
Yeah. Perhaps the targeting call might be sponsored by the Mafia. I hope that we sound like we're not pushing through quite as much as Reese Davis had to. Reese Davis is a king for doing that on Saturday night. Man, we're all probably pushing through a little bit on this Saturday because what a freaking day it was. The first time in SEC history that two AP top 5 teams lost to unranked teams on the same day, because it wasn't just Vandy beating Bama. We had Arkansas beating Tennessee, of course. My gosh. Also, by the way, number 9 Mizzou getting walloped in College Station. And if you want to include number 10 Michigan, number 11 USC, 5 of the top 11 teams lose on a day when there was one matchup of ranked teams. It should have been 6 because Miami probably should have lost 2.
Yeah, I mean, hey, Mizzou fans, the thing is, like, you thought, this day couldn't get worse. It's like it kept getting better because by this point we don't super care. Like, we're just like, hey man, cool. We got to go talk about Vandy, Alabama. As funny as that sounds.
Just by the end of the day, it was just chalk it up to the day, man. There was just something in the water. Texas couldn't have been happier to have had a bye week. LSU, I'm sure as well. If you were on bye, you won on Saturday.
Brian Kelly was man of the day.
Oh my gosh, what a
kept him away from a microphone. Couldn't ruin that day for anyone.
Unreal, man. Unbelievable. This sport never ceases to amaze me. It's truly incredible. All right, let's get into all this. Will, we got to start obviously with Bama and Vandy. Wow, what if you would
say that again?
Bama and Vandy is where we are starting. Of course, number 1 Alabama. If you had told me entering this day, Conner, by day's end, goalposts will make their way down Broadway and into the Cumberland River, I would have thought, dang, bachelor parties these days are pretty nuts, man. That would have been more likely than Vanderbilt football causing that reaction. Shoot, let's open it up. Not just bachelorette parties. High school football. I don't know. Maybe they're playing on a Saturday afternoon. Maybe they're like, hey, let's get these suckers off. Let's get them down into the river. Nashville high school football on and popping. I don't know. Maybe a couple of drunk dads took over and got onto the field after a big win on Friday night even. Literally anyone that wasn't Vanderbilt football hosting number 1 Alabama after that Georgia game, I would have believed. But instead, in a game of actual tackle football and not bowling or something or academic decathlon, Vanderbilt football beats Alabama. The place where Nick Saban himself said was the only place in the SEC that wasn't hard to play.
And soon those words were echoing off the walls as the crowd announcer played them on the speakers after the win.
Just all-time cold take, by the way. I would love
for
it.
Him.
Yes, for him.
For him. No, like literally, like, for him, it wasn't hard to play at Vanderbilt.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
He was telling the truth. He didn't understand a world where it was hard to play at Vanderbilt.
Well, to be fair, they got the construction going on. It's a little bit more intimate. It's 28,000 max capacity. There was like, who is it? Like Michael, I think it was Casagrande wrote about this. It was like the smallest crowd that Bama was going to be playing in front of in a conference game since like the Kennedy administration or something, because they have such reduced capacity that they're like, even if they sell that sucker out, which
it was all Bama fans. That's the other part. It was a home game on the road. I mean, if you're a Bama fan, do you go out after that?
Oh yeah. Are you kidding? First of all, you take off the Bama gear because you don't want to have those conversations. You can't have those conversations on Broadway. Like you are, if you're drinking your sorrows away, or if you're going out for a bite or something like that, you're not repping. That is one of those instances in which, yes, stand by your team, all those other things, but just be like you have other people come up to you and chat about the madness of college football, but don't out yourself as a Bama fan in that moment, because then you get random strangers coming up to you with their arm on your shoulder. It's like Creed when he comes up to Jim and starts rubbing his shoulders. He's like, "Oh, 7 days until Pam comes back." Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know what you do. There's nothing that Bama fans have ever been through in the last 17 years that could have prepared them for that moment outside of losing to Louisiana Monroe. I don't know. Well, let's start with Diego Pavia.
I mean, like, we could talk about how Bama, like, quote unquote, lost this game, but Vanderbilt, like, won this game. That was, like, the most perplexing part of it. Bama did not play well. Don't get me wrong, and we'll get into that, but my goodness, did Vanderbilt play amazing?
It did. And that's, you know what? I'm glad, because we have to be able to talk about that and not just talk about, oh my God, what in the world is wrong with Bama? Mm-hmm. Diego Pavia tore down Aldi Matt Corral. That dude is dead. He doesn't exist anymore. He is Whole Foods Johnny Manziel. That is how he will forever be. Maybe Sprouts Johnny Manziel. Whole Foods might be a little bit too bougie for him. But I don't know what the rules are in Diego Pavia's world. This is still very new for me. We're less than 24 hours into this experience. But I do know that bleep buttons don't exist in post-game interviews. Right. Third downs are meant to be laughed at. 4th and 1 is a time to cut it loose and chuck it downfield and see if your guy's open in the end zone, which, based on yesterday, he is.
That throw felt made up. That felt like a Disney movie.
Yes. It looked so overthrown, that 4th and 1 conversion where Vandy is up 23-21, and I can't remember how early it was in the fourth quarter. But that was the moment where I said, oh, this is definitely happening today. Yep. Just unbelievable to have a little bit of like a misdirection trick play call. But when they complete that, Pavia's got you. He's got you. And man, he did. Like, he becomes the first quarterback in the last 20 years to win 3 games in his career as a 3-touchdown dog. Think about that.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
He became the first FBS quarterback in the last 20 years to win 3 games in his college career as a 3-touchdown dog.
And furthermore, as we discussed, Vanderbilt does not play home games.
No, that has nothing to do with home games.
I'm saying, like, every other quarterback does.
Yeah.
Like, Vanderbilt's home field advantage, like, it's not like their home road is different. It's like every game for him is, like, on the road pretty much.
Yeah, so he's got a lot of opportunities as a dog. By the way, Claire's got some thoughts on Diego Pavia, so apologies, show a little grace if you're hearing her in the background. We're, again, powering through on a Sunday morning here. Vandy beats just the – well, let me back up here. Not just the first time that Vandy has ever beat number 1. All right. Like, that was, we all knew that stat before even having to look it up. Vandy beats an AP top 5 team for the first time ever. 0-60 up until Diego Pavia shows up. As he said in that postgame, Vandy is effing turned. I mean, like, this isn't just a Clark Lee, Toby Keith win. It's not. Like, that is,
the state of New Mexico, we owe you an apology. We were not familiar with your game.
All of you. I feel like I should be eating green chilies every meal. I feel like I should go rewatch Breaking Bad. I feel like I should hit up Zach Arnett and be like, how's this analyst role for you? What's been up? Just see what's up with the entire state of New Mexico, because Clark Lee saw it. He knew. He's like, they got it going on. What they did last year, buddy, we need to bring that to Nashville. And boy, did he ever. Because this is the type of win that Clark Lee, not just going to tell his bosses about in the future to be able to get raises and all that. And, hey, this is why I should keep this job.
Brother, you're getting a statue after this win.
You and Diego, you're gonna have a statue arm in arm in the new remodeled stadium.
They're building a stadium right now. They can just throw a statue in there. It's no worries, bro.
Yeah, architects like, oh, we need to add a statue in. I mean, I guess that's not part of the plan, but yeah, I mean, I trust me, I was there watching from a crane yesterday. I saw how that played out. Perfectly understandable that you guys need a statue. Oh my God. Credit Clark Lee, man, because you couldn't have drawn up the fact that like this model that he has put together for his team would be anything but laughed at. You know, we kind of mocked it in the preseason. We did.
But not just that, he's so perfect at Vandy. We talked about this like way back, and I say this so complimentary because he's crazy. Because he doesn't live in reality. He lives in a reality where Vanderbilt can beat Alabama, and he just showed us all that reality. Like when you hear Clark Lee talk, you're like,
yes.
Oh, this guy really believes they can do this.
If you didn't know any better, listening to him in the post game, then he was interviewed by Dari and Doring and Ben Watson on SEC Final. Like you would have thought this guy just found out the McRib was back. I mean, his level of excitement just juxtaposed to Diego Pavia's was night and day. And you know what? Maybe that's why this relationship is working. And also, I mean, that's a game in which, like you brought up before, it's not just the fact that they got this quarterback that's got this unbelievable amount of swagger, but you know, in addition to that, as an export from New Mexico State, Tim Beck as an offensive schemer in this game was in his freaking bag.
Doug, they were jawing with Alabama from the time the game started to the time they convincingly won it. They were in Alabama's grills, pushing them around. Alabama was rattled by Vanderbilt because they were not prepared for what they walked into.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, like there's just Malachi Moore. I don't know what planet that guy was living on, but he was all out of sorts on Saturday. Like he was a shell of himself by day's end, and that kind of spoke to the nature of this Bama defense. And like Vandy put them in those spots where they just felt like Bama could do nothing right on the defensive side of the ball. And Eli Stowers deserves so much credit to the former quarterback at A&M who transferred to New Mexico State, and he follows, you know, this mass exodus from New Mexico State over to Vandy, and Pavia is shouting him out in the post game. Like it's you just like there's nothing
of the
about
off-season stories that we have been sold. This one being the one that was real is so wild.
It's wild. Like
because they picked up all of New Mexico, brought it to Nashville, beat Alabama. Diego Pavia is just him. He's just I don't know if this gentleman is like an NFL quarterback at this point. I have no idea. Like what can he do?
There's no way this guy's taller than 5'8".
That's the thing.
There is no way. I don't care what he's listed as. Look at this man next to the other linemen on this team, and you will realize, oh my God, I think he's probably 3 inches shorter than Johnny Manziel, maybe 4 inches shorter than him. He looks like Johnny Manziel's like little brother who's just like doing like a rebellious little brother who just wants to be like him so much. As far as I'm concerned,
that's part of it. I think that's what makes him so scary because you see him pop up and get in the defensive tackle, 4 and 5 stars, 350-pound guy. He's in their face and they're like, dude, relax. Yeah. Like they keep trying, like letting him respectfully die, and he's like, no, I'm alive. I'm right here. I'm your problem today.
Diego Pavia might just think that he's Johnny Manziel. And at this point, I don't have the heart to tell him that he's not. He might be right. I don't know. He said he watched it. Cole brought up the point on the broadcast. Like he's watched the Manziel Bama game like 100 times, and like the 2012 game, of course. And of course, he watched it a ton during this week. Do you think that if you asked Diego Pavia, like, did you just do you think that you just like transformed into Johnny Manziel and got to be him for a day? For actually, you know what? For all I know, Diego Pavia at this point might have more confidence than peak Johnny Manziel. He might.
That's the thing. I think he thinks Johnny Manziel was prepared for him.
Maybe, yeah. Like Johnny Manziel walked so Diego Pavia could run.
Exactly. Yes.
I mean, it just. I don't care what happens the rest of the season for Vandy in terms of like, oh, if they go 5-7, would it be like a disappointment after this start? Whatever. They hit the over, by the way, on their win total. But lost in the shuffle of all this. They hit the over. They win their first SEC game since 2022, Will. They hadn't beaten SEC teams since they beat Anthony Richardson. Think about that. Wow. I mean, they're the SEC quarterbacks that Clark Lee beat: Will Levis, Anthony Richardson, Jalen Milroe. We're gonna like all these NFL draft conversations about like those guys they had to watch like what it was like for them going up against this Vandy defense to find their flaws, and probably the same will be said for Jalen Milroe as well, going up against the Vandy defense, just as we all predicted. Like I'm rambling here and I'm at a bit of a loss for words, but those are just things that we, as much football as we watch, we can never prepare ourselves for until they actually happen. And don't you know it? It happened on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? This is why college football is so beautiful, right? Like I got the Festus Ezeli jersey on, right? And I think
Yeah, you do.
taking out baseball, right? This is the last time I remember thinking that like Vandy was good at a revenue sport was when Festus was there, right? Like playing like basketball back in those days, and it feels like Vanderbilt is actively de-incentivized athletics. I don't want to like put them, on the cross after their big win, but it feels like it's just kind of been like a choice to not really prioritize it, and it's like this is why students have pride in this university. It's a community building thing. It's the fact that everybody who went to Vanderbilt who is living their super successful career today is like on cloud nine. That's why athletics matter. That's why the silly fun craziness of college football can just bring all of us together to just be lovers and to a degree haters, right, for one afternoon where you got people from across the world going, oh my gosh, look at Diego Pavia.
It's just, yeah, you have to just soak it all in and appreciate the fact that this can happen on a given day. I mean, I wouldn't have told you it could happen. And even though I said in the preview, I don't think it's going to be fun for Bama to chase around Diego Pavia for the day, I also made sure to say, by no stretch of the imagination am I predicting that he is going to find the answers to beat Alabama. But don't you know it, man? He did. So let's talk about the Bama side, and we'll probably hit on some more Vandy points as well. I know you've been waiting for this, but the wild thing is that while in the words of Hugh Freeze, who also knows a thing or two about getting a full dose of Diego Pavia, Bama probably wins this game 9 times out of the next 9 if they play a total of 10 times. And
I'm not sure of that.
But maybe not.
I'm really not. Because what did they do well in this game?
You're right. Like, Vandy was the more physical team, and Bama was the one who actually needed the absurd plays just to be able to stay in it. Like, even the catch, I know Ryan Williams was brilliant. We're probably going to talk about him in a minute, but the catch that Jeremy Bernard made too on the sideline, we were just like, oh my God, like this is what Bama's doing just to stay afloat in this one. And instead of this being like, oh, you know what, Bama figures things out after like a slow start, middle of the second quarter or something like that, Bama's defense had 0 answers. Kane Womack, the defensive coordinator that we've had conversations about and disagreeing kind of where they were going to be at year one, schematically, he had no answer for anything that Pavia was doing, whether it was the design rollouts, they couldn't tackle in space to save their lives. Anytime that he would see somebody in the flat, that guy in the flat had like the running room that he needed, and Pavia would hit him in stride to be able to turn it upfield. Like, Bama couldn't get off the field on third down. Vandy converted 12 of 18 third downs and possessed the football for 42 minutes. That's not crazy out of nowhere fluke upset material.
That's exactly my point. Is like, I think they could do that again next week against this team. And that's interesting if you're an Alabama fan. It's particularly someone if you think Kane Womack was a good hire.
Look, I'm defending Kane Womack from the standpoint of like, I do think that he knows what he's doing defensively. That game was not an example of that. It was not. It was the very first time in which it was very painfully obvious you don't have Nick Saban on that sideline to troubleshoot when everything is hitting the fan. Was this the first game that Saban wasn't at? He might not have been at the Wisconsin game. Yeah, because they weren't College Game Day wasn't there, and that was a new game. So this was, I guess, the second game that he wouldn't have been at. But I think for that reason, I think it's too dismissive to say that Bama was just hungover after Georgia, or that in a day of chaos, it just couldn't get it done. Like, I don't think you can just say 100% that's what it was, even though that's probably what the history books will remember about this day specifically. And when we look back, even at the end of the season, maybe when some of those playoff conversations are had, those 2 points right now, Georgia hangover, day of chaos, week 6, it got everyone. People use that to describe Bama with this loss.
Yep.
But that shouldn't be the entire explanation when we dig into this bigger issue, because the 2 instances that Bama's faced a mobile quarterback this year were Byron Brown, the USF quarterback, and Diego Pavia. Bama couldn't get off the field against those guys. Yep. That's bad.
And I'll say too, this is why I confidently picked Georgia, despite what Georgia fans told me. This is a Bama team that can be had. I'm sorry that you guys can't do it. Vandy can. So get in line, I guess, maybe next year, or maybe later this year. Who's to say, right? But yeah, I mean, this was kind of the version of Alabama that I was talking about in the offseason, where I was like, guys, I'm a big believer in you can't have two conflicting thoughts, right? We can't think we're going to lose the greatest college football team of all time, hire this guy from Washington, and just stay good. And what should have happened is Alabama should have lost to Georgia, showed up against Vandy, and gotten angry, and that would have been fine. Would have been way less funny. This is incredibly funny. But these defensive issues, and honestly, to agree, offensive issues, like the defensive issues I saw coming a mile away, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are, like, Saban himself saw them a mile away and brought them up about how the secondary, those issues that they were going to have with the turnover there were the reason why he didn't pick them to be able to go to the SEC championship. And to this point, they hadn't really faced someone that could test them, I mean, in that way until the second half, I guess, against Carson Beck. But other than that, like, this was a group that struggled mightily and looked like a shell of its former self.
Yeah, and like the defensive issues, many people, Nick Saban myself, saw the offensive issues. That's new. That's what's really interesting about this.
I'm not as worried about the offense. What specifically about the offense worried you as much? Because the pick six that happens early on, it's a bad read by Milroe, but like they still were like actually getting chunk plays in the way that you would think, and they still ran the ball, I think, fine, but they couldn't get the ball. When you only have the ball for 17 minutes, it is awfully difficult to do. I mean, the fumble, I guess, was bad as well. So like,
that's not like a scheme thing. What I'm saying though is like, okay, you have this half against Georgia where you can't really do anything on offense, and then that kind of translates to being sluggish against Vandy. And what I'm saying is it's a lot more hot and cold offense. Like what I thought this was going to be was an Alabama team that was better, significantly better on offense, because I just didn't think they were that good on offense last year, and I thought they would be able to lean on that while they figured out their defense. This is a team that was getting exposed on defense. Like we've talked about, we can use that word. They got exposed against Vanderbilt because it happened against USF. It happened in the second half against Georgia. Like, this is a team that was happening, and I would think to myself, okay, I always was joking about this with Joe Burrow. Guess we're Oklahoma now. Guess we're just going to give up a couple of touchdowns in a row, 3, 4, whatever. We got Joe Burrow, it'll be fine. Alabama was not able to go punch for punch with Vanderbilt either. So I think there's kind of two sides of it at this point.
They did not register a single sack. Bama did not have a single sack against Vandy. Problem. And that defensive line was billed as a strength in the first part of the season because Tim Keenan, I thought, was playing really well. I thought some of the things that they were doing up front schematically, like I actually thought were working, and to not be able to dial up the pressure in a spot where, good Lord, did they need to get Vandy behind the sticks, and they could not do it. Like that to me was part of it. The discipline issues were evident, and it's not that Bama hasn't had discipline issues in the last years of Saban. I mean, we
didn't
talked
have
about
the same dude with the same number, or two dudes with the same number on the field.
Right?
That's Billy Napier type stuff.
Yeah, that was
because I've watched Billy Napier do that same thing, and I've went, wow, this guy looks it over his head.
Yeah.
So now I take the step back. It's the same thing that I said about Florida. I said Florida does this stuff, and we call them losers. So when Alabama does it, what do we call them?
When Bama's number one team in the country, and it's a little bit different having the body of work, having already
and they both losing to Vanderbilt.
I mean, I guess I'll still take the over on Bama's win projection as opposed to like year 1 or year 2 of Florida.
But you got to understand, they lost that game because they had two gentlemen with number 2 in the field at the same time.
They lost the game because they also
fourth down.
Yeah, the roughing the passer penalty was really really bad to be able to extend the drive. You can't have those mistakes. You just can't. And the thing is, like, so Kalen DeBoer had games like this at Washington. He had games. In fact, the exact play that he dialed up to Ryan Williams on that 4th and 1, that little like misdirection running play where it's a little pitched him. Before Ryan Williams even crossed the goal line, I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's the exact play that he ran against Washington State to be able to win that game. And then like, I can't remember who tweeted the clip, but I think it was like Dan Casey, the coach Dan Casey, who does a really good job tweeting out the clips. Yeah. It was like, that was it right there. Clark Lee found a way to prevent Kalen DeBoer from winning that nail biter down to the wire game, in which DeBoer, to this point of his coaching career, has always shown up like he can win those close games. He can make those right decisions. And it wasn't there. And the issue now that you see for Bama big picture, even if this does end up being like, hey, Bama still goes 10-2 and it just ends up being part of a crazy day, you're just going to have a much tougher time troubleshooting in that area of defense. And Vandy provided a blueprint because if they can do it, with those 3 stars, buddy, I don't know where they're going to find those answers defensively to get more sound, because there were so many issues with the way that Vandy made them stretch the field horizontally and how they attacked with that offense. And I can guarantee you there will be more people looking at the game plan that Tim Beck drew up than the game plan that Mike Bobo drew up. And that's crazy. It's crazy, but I think it's more like you can replicate that. I know. I trust me, Will. I know. And Georgia fans let you have it for hating on the Bobo thing. And I can't believe I became the Mike Bobo defender of this podcast. How crazy things have changed. It's just all so wild, the process. It truly is. If I had come out with a preseason predictions saying that Vandy's going to beat Bama, like let's picture one of those, summer things, like go on Feinbaum or something like that. I'm like, yeah, I think this is the year that Vandy gets Bama. I think my bosses would have sat me down and wondered if I was mentally right and said, Connor, we can't have you like going on public airwaves and saying stuff like this anymore. There are people that are willing to do that, and I'm not going to name names. You know who they are. But I would have been checked. And we didn't think any world would exist where Vandy would be this competitive with Bama. There's no scenario in which anybody could have forecast in the preseason that Bama would beat Georgia and then lose to Vandy. It just, it is wild college football, early season stuff. And you know what? I shouldn't even call it early season stuff. It's just wild college football stuff that the first Nick Saban ain't here anymore moment was provided by Clark Lee and not Kirby Smart. Extend Clark Lee. Give him a new contract. 2030s statue, all of it. Billboard's less than a statue. I don't know what I'm talking about. Stadium naming rights. Those are. There you go. Is that still on the table? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. He's earned it.
Yeah, I'll say this too. It's like that's why I try to not get as caught up in the game by game and look at these like broader trends, right? And so like I said, I mean, I just want to hammer this again. Just because we didn't pick Vanderbilt, okay, which I don't think anyone in America did. I don't even think Vanderbilt fans did.
Did Diego Pavia's brothers pick Vanderbilt?
Diego Pavia himself, his whole family, that coaching staff, every player on that field picked Vanderbilt. My mistake.
Yeah.
Of those gentlemen were all on one page, they picked Vanderbilt. They were right. My bad. Point being, outside of the program, So, but when you say, here's what I expect it to look like when Alabama struggles under DeBoer and Kane Womack. Okay, again, we expected that to happen against Georgia. It kind of didn't, right? That doesn't mean like, oh, you guys were wrong. No. All we can do is pick which teams can see these things that we can see. Vanderbilt saw those things. Okay, we could talk to a degree if Georgia did or didn't. Now, from going from here, the thing that's so fascinating about this, you spoke on this, the discipline issues. Oh boy, getting a penalty at the end of the game, screaming at his teammates, like that's new. And if you're an Alabama fan, like my stepbrother like went to Bama, I was talking to him. And again, imagine me talking to an Alabama fan who is telling me things are we were like, I remember you on Monroe. He was like, this Kane Womack guy's a bum. I'm like, you're not wrong there. That one I'm not going to fight you on, but the rest of the stuff, it's a long season, and like, and whatever. So point being, like, we're seeing something that we as the neutral viewing public, and a hand up here, not always neutral, not rarely neutral when it comes to Alabama. I've always said that. But we've been kind of waiting for this humanizing moment for Alabama because, if you take out the 2007 season, I mean, what's the last loss that it was any degree of embarrassing? Like South Carolina, maybe A&M. But that's Jimbo Fisher, all the money, all the 5-star. He promised a championship. He only delivered an Alabama win. But, like, that's it, right?
Yeah, and Jim Dunaway was talking about, like, worst Bama losses and where this ranks, at least in recent memory, because sometimes when you get away from the context of what Bama has been, it's a little bit different. If you're talking about like, oh, they were dealing with sanctions and whatnot, it's not entirely fair to compare it
to.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there are probably a couple of candidates, but like South Carolina, even at the time, it was Bama as this world beater juggernaut. And that atmosphere happening on the road in Williams-Brice, a place that is difficult to play, no matter who you are. And Stephen Garcia,
similar quarterback,
unable
to process that this team was worse than Alabama on that day.
Yeah, 2 quarterbacks that were just totally unconscious, like offensive coordinators that were in their bag. I think it's different than the South Carolina loss. I do, because we almost look back at that as, man, Bama had a grind coming into that. Saban spoke about the schedule coming into it, and this is Vandy, man. This is Vandy.
There's no excuse
This is everyone in the SEC in Vandy in its own category. So this is so much worse. This is so much worse for Bama. This is the worst loss that Bama has suffered since I have been consuming college football consistently, which, I mean, I guess those dates are debatable. I'm not realizing. I've kind of been consuming college football consistently since Peyton Manning.
Sober.
So since I had a driver's license circa 2006, I guess that's probably, Louisiana Monroe is going to be chalked up to year zero. But man,
but see, that's the thing. That's what's so, and like we talked about, this is like this is why it's so great to host a podcast with you, because we come from completely different worlds, right? So they're in kind of the journalism world. It is about a little bit of like the storytelling, all that stuff. For me, the beginning of this head coaching search, I was like, this is PR. Not that you ever disagreed with me, right? But we just came at it from two different perspectives. And I was like, I just don't think everything from square one has gone totally right with Alabama the way they would have you believe. And I think this is exactly what starts to creep out whenever we live in this kind of Mr. Rogers neighborhood where everything's perfect, none of the players transfer, it's not going to be a step down from the greatest coach of all time, all this different stuff. And I do want to like legitimately ask you a question, and I'm done here. With this, with those things, with the discipline issues, with the guys they brought, right, with the scheme they have, what about this is fixable from like a defensive standpoint? Because we know Ryan Williams is electric. He was by himself in this game. Like the offense, I think will be fine still. I don't think DeBoer forgot offense. Defensively, what do you think this team's floor ceiling is?
That's my point. Well, they're going to play in a lot of games like this. They will. They're going to play in a lot of games where if and look at the mobile quarterbacks that they've got coming up. They got a lot.
Let's do it.
They got a lot. I mean, they've got Nico coming up, Brady Cook. I mean, I don't know if we can qualify him as a mobile quarterback. We're going to get to some Mizzou thoughts in a bit. Why his mobility is probably not where it was last year, but and then they have one more. They have 3 consecutive mobile quarterbacks coming up, I believe. Who's the third one?
Nico. Nuss not mobile.
Sellers,
but
was the other one. Okay, so that's a little bit different. I mean, don't discount anything. If Vandy's beating Bama, we definitely don't need to discount the idea of South Carolina beating Bama. But that's going to be an issue, and that's part of the reason why I liked Milroe to win the Heisman Trophy this year, was because I thought they were going to be forced to play in a lot of these games, just like Jaden Daniels last year. And I'm not saying that means Bama's going 8-4 and this defense is about to be 2023 LSU. But they're going to have a lot more games than this than people are used to. They just are, because I don't think the troubleshooting is necessarily there. They do not have the guys on the back end that many thought that they did early in the season when they really weren't being tested yet. And I don't know that Tyler Van Dyke would have exposed that necessarily, because he's not necessarily that mobile guy. But like, it wasn't going to happen at Wisconsin where they're all of a sudden getting exposed. That's the issue. I'll still take Bama to be in that playoff conversation. I don't think that this all of a sudden sends them into a 7-5 season or anything like that. But this is the identity of this team.
It's funny because I'm looking for the losses. I was like, where's the loss? Oh, it's Georgia. The loss I was missing was supposed to be Georgia. I'm sorry. I hate to just keep saying that, but it's like that was the hard game on their schedule. Yeah, you got Tennessee, but they look beat. I mean, at Rocky Top, who's to say, right? Nico needs to be less mobile at Buckeye after last night.
Ooh,
point being, yeah, I mean, the gentleman from Oklahoma could be interesting, just depending on where they're at with the quarterback situation.
Michael Hawkins, yeah.
Yeah, second to last week of the season, and we'll see where they're doing at the quarterback. Right. We don't know. But yeah, I just, that's the thing. And to your point, again, not saying their last year's LSU squad, but like that was the new experience for me. I'll just put a bow on it there, which is seeing these, like Bama's defense was this faceless, like the Empire from Star Wars, with these soldiers that you were like, they were just rotating guys in. Oh, who's the guy I got to be scared of this year? Is the scariest guy I've ever seen. Oh, Will Anderson, he's better than Jonathan Allen. Awesome. Cool. I'm scared now. Like genuinely, like these guys are new. They would find new monsters to throw at me every year. And now I'm like, you guys are like arguing with each other. You're like, when plays that shouldn't, like that don't really matter happen, you're celebrating. That's how you know a defense that doesn't really know what's up, is when you have like, you give up a 15-yard pass play, you get a big hit in, and the guys are like dapping each other up and doing like the sword thing. It's like, that would have never happened under Nick Saban. And I think, as I kind of talked about in the offseason, there are going to be several moments of this that would never happen under Nick Saban. You know, not just the Roll Tide Willie stuff, but like the on-the-field discipline. Like I said, just as they had so much fun last week with Ryan Williams and the celebration, and they felt emotional, Acting like you've been there before is hard when you haven't.
Yeah, the pendulum could swing both ways. And Milroe talked about that on this very show. That was the moment that he realized that this was no longer Nick Saban's Alabama, was when he made that awesome throw in practice and he wasn't celebrating. And DeBoer comes up to him. He's like, what's wrong? And he's like, I don't know. I'm just not really accustomed to celebrating a practice. So he's like, no, like celebrate it. That was an unbelievable throw. Like, soak this
What's
in.
the worst could happen? So do you think we'll lose to Vandy?
Oh, God. On that fine note,
that was nice.
Vandy, you deserve all the credit in the world. I hope that if you're listening to this on Sunday, I hope your hangover is not too bad. And if it is, I hope that you embrace whatever it was that you got to do on Saturday night that you've never been able to do in your football lives before. Vandy fans, you deserve this. And I hope that you remember this. Or if you don't, maybe because you had a little bit too much to drink, I hope that if you don't remember this, you will at least have enough footage of people that can actually remember this and tell this story back to you, like Clark Lee will tell his grandkids. All right. That was a lot on that game. We got to spend a lot on this one, too. Tennessee and Arkansas will. You know that I don't like to compare things to 2007, the 2007 season specifically. It was such a chaotic year that I don't think we're ever going to truly repeat. I don't think that we will. Just giant after giant falling on its face. The curse of number 2, something that's well documented if you listen to the show.
The BCS system in itself, right? Because it wasn't even it was like a made up weird check the newspaper situation.
Yeah, and just weird things happen all over the place. I guess I should never say never, but this was the first game that I thought, 2007 comps could be on the table. They could. Arkansas earns its highest ranked win since 2007 against LSU, a game that you probably remember very well, a game that we thought was going to take LSU out of the national championship conversation, and it turns out it did not. That LSU team, of course, wins the title after losing to Arkansas. They had previously lost to Kentucky, a game that we talked about last week. And this game, I think in a lot of ways after the day that was, made me realize that we are perhaps setting up for a national champ that's going to have an uglier loss or uglier losses than any national champ in recent memory, maybe since 2007 LSU. So that's more so what I mean about that. This game made no sense in so many ways. And I'm not going to do the thing where I'm like, oh, I predicted this to happen in the preseason, so I saw this coming a mile away. I had my guy Phil Elson just, hit that line. I've been doing Arkansas radio with him like every other week since 2018, circa Chad Morris era. And
I
he was
don't
like,
think
texting
this is a day, really quick. This is a day that because we differed on one game, was wrong about literally every game. And I want to pat myself on the back because I literally got everything wrong from start to finish. You got A&M right. I didn't. So that means that I was wrong about everything.
Yeah, those are the best. I actually I like more so when I'm wrong and I feel like, oh my gosh, I have to like figure these things out as opposed to just like, true. Oh, it's confirmation bias. But like this game, because I said in the preview pod, I think this Tennessee team is different than who I thought they were going to be coming into the season. So I'm backing off that. And Phil Elson was texting me. He's like, man, you called this because I said it on their show in the offseason. I'm like, actually, I backed off of this. So I deserve zero credit for this whatsoever because the way that this played out was so strange and so bizarre with the identity of who these teams have been in the season. First of all, like we mentioned last week after Kentucky beat Ole Miss, how Kentucky is the team that never, ever, ever gets those breaks. Arkansas is the other team in the SEC that truly owns that of, oh my God, if it can go wrong, it will. Clint Sterner fumble. I mean, not to go down that road, but in this matchup, of course, that's on the minds of everyone. Arkansas almost always wins. That's the mantra, right? The simple fact that definitely not Auburn. Arkansas finally beat a top 5 team at home for the first time since, ironically enough, it beat Tennessee 1999. The year after Tennessee wins the national championship was wild. Absolutely wild. Arkansas hadn't beaten an SEC team at home, any SEC team at home, since November 19th, 2022 against Ole Miss. In that 42-27 game that we were talking about the other day with Lane, of like, is that the worst loss of the Lane Kiffin era at Ole Miss? I think the Kentucky loss was worse, but Tennessee might have been riding high off the Oklahoma game, but it had a bye week. So naturally, Tennessee, fresh, comes out in the first half and has 15 rushing yards. and Josh Heupel is shut out in the first half for his first time ever as a head coach. The only part of this game that made sense within the game was when Tennessee made Arkansas pay very early in the second half with 2 touchdown drives after the Hogs had just 3 points in the first half. And it was like, all right, order had been restored. Arkansas is really going to regret that it didn't make Tennessee pay for, that it couldn't come up with touchdown drives. And they're really going to regret that. Nice effort
Taylor
by Arkansas.
Green was just not playing for most of this comeback.
Yeah, which that's another part of this. I mean, I wouldn't say most of it, but he was sidelined at the end of it.
Right.
And like Arkansas, who was struggling to move the ball for a decent amount of this game, like when they need to have it, this go-ahead touchdown drive late, and they are without Taylor Green, and they're without Jaquindon Jackson too. That's their 1-2 punch. That's their entire
kind of all they had. They were like punting at weird times, kicking. They were like, I don't know what to do right now. And I was like, oh, buddy, like you're letting this get away from you because they just did. And it ended up being a great decision, as we always do, playing the results. They did score a little bit too early as well, which was terrifying.
Yeah.
But like that was yeah, exactly. Like it was like, wow, that was really easy. There's a reason for that, brother.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, Malachi Singleton deserves credit because to that point, I did not think there was any chance he was going to lead a touchdown drive. And I'm sure Josh Heupel didn't. I'm sure that Tennessee defense did not think that up until they got to the point where it was like, hey, there's a minute 20 left in this game. If Tennessee doesn't let him score here, they're not going to get the ball back.
Right.
And I agreed with Herbie 100% on that. And I disagreed with Fowler. Maybe the college football gods weren't too pleased that Tennessee's defense definitely let him score on that play. But I thought in that moment, it was the smart move. Get the ball back to your offense, see if they can march down the field and have this be another Arkansas moment in which they almost win. And instead, this ends up being like, gosh, are we going to say this? Okay, I'm going to say it. Nico's last-ditch attempt was Joe Milton running out of bounds at the Swamp. And that is a sentence I did not think I would say for this game. Here's another one I didn't think I'd say about this game. Arkansas turned Tennessee's offense into the Joe Milton version of the Tennessee offense.
Yes. And I'm just not sure how. I've never felt like as much
Travis
of a
Williams.
sicko. Yeah. I've never felt like as much as a sicko as watching Miami somehow and the ACC refs conspire to win. And I'm sitting there talking about my boy Max Toscano, like the X's and the O's guy, and I'm like, tell me what I just saw. I don't understand. And he's like kind of going about it and see if this lines up with your reality, because it made sense to me. It's like what he said was basically if you could figure out how to stop the screens, stop the run, and stop vertical choice, there's nothing else.
Sure, all of that. Yeah, let's do that. Why not?
No. But point being, whenever they've lost, because when they've lost, it's always looked the same. And I've been trying to, because when they win, like they have these games like the game against Oklahoma, which is against like a great defense. You're like, but basically you got to be able to contain the quarterback and or the run game by pressuring 4. And they have what's his name, Landon Jackson, who is kind of able to create a mismatch there. And so like I'm trying to like understand why Tennessee looks like this sometimes. I know I'm like going backwards, but it's like if we're gonna keep like we're talking about trends, right? If we're gonna keep talking about Tennessee, keep predicting Tennessee. It's really going to be about, is there a defense that can do this? And I mean, talent-wise, morale-wise, there was nothing pointing to Arkansas being able to do this. I really just think it was that their defense had kind of figured out what Tennessee was doing. They had the personnel for it. And Nico is just, to your point, I mean, sometimes he's going to look like the most polished, like, ageless guy. And then sometimes, like, they play at the end, it's like, man, like, you are just kind of a kid. Like, you are
He turtled.
Yeah. And that's what happens when you have a young quarterback. There's just nothing to say about that. That's just being, I couldn't imagine what I was doing at that age, right? Like, who's to say? But I think that's the thing. And maybe it is why Tennessee might need to wait a year or two before they get that poise. Because at the end, I still thought Tennessee was like going to come back and win because they had so many shots at the end zone. They had 4, and I think they took 1.
Yeah. They didn't really have much of a chance, I thought, on that last drive. And that's the weird thing. I credit to Nico Slaughter, the former Tennessee transfer, for playing huge in that game down the stretch. And that Arkansas defense as a whole, man, like they had Nico totally flustered. They sacked him.
Snap. I thought that was a run play.
Oh, yeah.
The snap hits.
Yes. The snap hits Nico in the hands with like 15 seconds left. And it goes
the running back just grabs it and takes off. Heads up play by that kid.
Dylan Sampson just takes it and runs it. And everybody's like, Tennessee just handed off the football with 15 seconds left, and they're at like the 30-yard line. What are they doing? They need a touchdown. Right. And it turns out it was a bobbled play. But yeah, like so much of that game did not necessarily make sense with who these teams have been. Arkansas really struggled to be able to kind of generate that pass rush, and that hadn't necessarily been their MO. I had been praising them for how they've defended elite running backs and what they did to Ollie Gordon II, what they did to Jarquez Hunter. And again, in a spot like this, like Dylan Sampson actually ended up having a pretty good game. He kind of had that breakthrough 53-yard run early in the second half that I thought was going to get the Tennessee offense going. Didn't turn out to be the case, but they sacked him 4 times. They sacked Nico 4 times. Tennessee had only allowed 6 sacks all year. And the only thing where I will defend Nico's performance for, the only thing that I'll give him a little bit of a pass for, is that Brew McCoy, Dante Thornton, and Squirrel White all had in-game injuries. And I thought they lacked continuity in the passing game. And it was very rare to feel like Nico was going one read and like tuck it, or one read and look down and then have to like regroup. And maybe those guys being banged up led to some of that. But I mean, it wasn't quite Oklahoma top 5 receivers are out type of stuff. So I don't want to necessarily give that type of excuse. But he looked like a guy that just could not find his footing. And there was no Clint Sterner fumble to be had in this one, much to the chagrin of those Arkansas fans who have been waiting for a moment like that. And it was an Arkansas field rush against a legit national title contender. The second time that UT came into Fayetteville for a night game with Fowler and Herbie on the call, and we got a field rush for Sam Pittman. See what I did there, by the way? That was a 2021 Texas reference. Who's the real UT? People are asking.
There you go.
Holly Rowe actually asked Pittman in the postgame, it's like, is this your first field rush? And then he brought it up. He's like, oh, no, it's happening against Texas too. And I realized, like, I think that was like Holly Rowe that was before she joined this crew. So she wasn't necessarily there to remember all that. But monumental win for Sam Pittman. Monumental win for him and his future. 4-2 going into the bye with wins
really
at
quick,
Auburn.
One more thing on Tennessee, because I think you just wrapped it up really well, which is that I think the takeaway here, this offense for Tennessee needs good receivers and or a mobile quarterback. And to
they
your
have
point,
both. They got
hurt.
Yeah,
the receivers got hurt.
Yeah.
I think that does matter a ton, because they need receivers who can create separation and win one-on-one battles. And when you look back at the Georgia game, right, that we also remember, that was man-to-man corners, talent, erasing those receivers who didn't go away, didn't get injured, but they were able to overcome that. Yep. In this game, the receivers got injured, so Arkansas not having Georgia-level corners didn't matter as much. So that's the bow I put on this, is that, yeah, when the offense is working, and Nico can use his legs the way that Hendon Hooker could, this offense could be explosive, but you gotta have receivers who, because there are so many choice routes. So yeah, I think that this made less sense to me than the Bama Vandy game, like a lot less sense.
Like there's
that's where I'm going.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of, like, if you told an Arkansas fan, hey, Taylor Green's going to get hurt at the end of this game, and you're still going to find a way to come back and win it. Right. I mean, that just, none of that scenario would have made sense at all. And you know what? Credit Malachi Singleton, credit that offense for just staying poised. Andrew Armstrong, by the way, that guy's having a heck of a year and needs to be talked about more. He was the exact type of receiver of things that could have made sense in this game. I thought he was the type of receiver that Tennessee had not really seen to this point. And him being that big physical guy on the outside, I thought presented them some problems. But man, I mean, hopefully Taylor Green's going to be back and healthy for the sake of our entertainment, because it is still electric. I mean, James Pierce had some moments where he was really getting after him in this game, but didn't turn the ball over. That was so huge. And Pittman said afterwards, like, we don't turn the ball over, we can play with any team in the country. And when you do that to the number 4 team, as decorated as Tennessee was, it's kind of hard to disagree with that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, poor Green to face Nick Scorton and Pierce in back-to-back weeks.
That's not fair. That's just so not fair. Oh my God. Can you imagine getting all 280 pounds of Nick Scorton just landing on you in a game,
eating your lunch at the end of the last game? You got to line it up and go, okay, let me do this again to the next defense.
And I've got to go against the guy that's 40 pounds lighter than Nick Scorton, but he's also faster, totally different player. And I've got to have that guy in my ear hole. Good night, man. And credit to him. He didn't make that game-changing turnover that I think Arkansas fans were just kind of waiting for. And that just didn't happen. And as a result, they won this game. I don't want to dismiss playoff possibilities for Tennessee. I'm not doing that. I would still say they have a really good chance to be able to make it. But here's why, even in the 12-team playoff era, a loss like that is daunting. You don't want to have, if you're Tennessee, another loss before Georgia in mid-November, right? We agree. Tennessee needs to be going into that with one loss to feel really good about its playoff chances. And now the good news is you get 4 consecutive home games. That's the good news. But it's Florida. I don't need to tell Tennessee fans about their issues against Florida, who looks like a much better team on Saturday. So,
at Florida.
No, it's home against Florida.
No. I'm saying their issues are all at Florida.
It's not all at Florida. It's not. Will, look it up. It's not all at Florida. Trust me, it's not.
Right. I'm just trying to make them feel better, right? Like most of the time, they feel better at home.
Home against Bama. It's still a demon.
That's the one.
It's still a demon you got to exercise. And I realize Bama lost the last time that they were there, and it's a Nick Saban era thing. So I take that for what it is. Home against Kentucky, which that defensive line could very much have a good day against what we saw from Tennessee's offensive line, which is dealing with some injuries right now as well. And then Mississippi State. Josh Heupel only has 2 wins against rivals, and now he needs to beat those 2 rivals in the next 2 weeks. Or he's got to go. You got to go at least 2-1 in those 3 rivalry games that you're going to have: home against Florida, home against Bama, and then later on when you're at Georgia. That's the daunting reality. You don't want to be 9-3 on the outside looking in of a conference championship game and assume that your team is going to make it to the playoff. That's why I bring that up.
That's a beautiful way to put that, honestly, about the rivalry thing, where it's like, dude, every game is going to be, boom, boom, boom. Like, you're going to have almost all of these. Because to your point, it's like, hey, man, if you lose to Bama, you better win at Sanford Stadium.
You better. Yep. The last remaining SEC unbeaten. We're in the first weekend of October, and there is 1 remaining unbeaten in a 16-team SEC. And don't you know it? It's the other UT. It's Texas. And their lone SEC game was at home against Mississippi State.
Conner, are they back in?
Does Texas get to qualify itself as back for being the last undefeated team in the SEC?
They're the last SEC team to not puke on their shoes. It's like, wait a minute. Wait, who would have thought we would be so happy to have Texas because they'd be saving us from national embarrassment?
Well, you know what? I'm more okay with that Texas is back declaration than Sam Ehlinger saying that Texas is back with a 10-second we're back after a 4-loss season. More okay with that. But by the way, didn't you tell me that you were with someone on Saturday who was like in the Texas band? Yes, that happened.
It's like my girl's birthday and her friends are here. And one of her friends was casually telling me she was in the band for the We're Back game. I was like, that's kind of fire. Honestly, That's the Bevo game. But anyway, we got plenty of time for that,
buddy. It is the Bevo game. Yeah, we'll get to it at one point when it's over under 0.5 assaults that take place on our sweet Prince Uga in that game. But we'll talk about that game when it comes in a couple weeks here. All right, Mizzou, Texas A&M.
But also good for Arkansas. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that, but just one quick little good for Arkansas. Pittman saved his job.
I think so.
I think he's at least going to get another year for sure. I'm so happy for him.
And buddy, back up the Brinks trucks to get Travis Williams paid.
Oh yeah,
making that guy a $2 million coordinator, whatever you got to do to keep him around for another year, because you're seeing the fruits of that labor and what he inherited from Perry Odom. Like, that group was so bad 2 years ago. Will, they were so bad, and they are so much better schematically and so much more sound. They need to be getting that credit because they are not a fun team to play against, and that will be the case for the remainder of that schedule. I think Sam Pittman now has a really favorable path to be able to get to 7 wins, and even if 7-5 with a win against Tennessee, against a top 5 team at home, yes, that definitely saves his job.
Yeah, right. And just real quick, sorry, the Oklahoma State was a heartbreaking game. We felt it getting away. The A&M game, same deal. This is an Arkansas team that feels like it deserves this. It feels like they fight every game.
Yeah.
It feels like the Auburn win was nice, right? But like, it feels like, it would just be an injustice to not have them win one of these games because of how hard they play. It feels like Pittman has really like found something, especially in this season. To your point about Travis Williams, man, look at Arkansas before he got there. Look at UCF after he left with Ted Roof. Oh my gosh. I mean, that guy should be up for the Burroughs Award. Anyway, great job, Arkansas. Don't want to make this all about Tennessee. You guys deserve it.
Toby Keith win for Sam Pittman. No doubt about it. 100%. All right, Mizzou and A&M. Well, we were told this was the only game of ranked teams this is the only game involving ranked teams all day. That's what we were told. This felt by day's end like a cake week game. Yes, it's cake week, not cupcake week. If you know, you know. Dare I say, the top 10 team, put that in air quotes, felt like the one that was collecting the 7-figure paycheck to be there. At least that's how they showed up. I don't think Mizzou got paid 7 figures to take part in this game. I I will not, however, rule out the idea of some rich A&M boosters feeling so bad for Mizzou that it was just like, just take all the money in my wallet. Just not an inverted mugging of sorts, like a pity, like a pity
Did you
party.
see that some A&M boosters sent that boy Weiss a blanket?
So, okay, we need to let's back up because
Sorry.
I do not think that was an A&M thing at all. And Mike Elko definitely pushed back on that afterwards. If you missed what we were talking about, there was a blanket that was sent. Who was it? It was it Will Hall, who's nicknamed the Blanket.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently in Theo Weiss's hotel room, there was a note with a blanket saying like, hey, this is what it's going to be like all day for you. And that was apparently
get used to this blanket. It will be real tomorrow. Ominous.
Buddy, that's got drink written all over it.
Oh my gosh.
That's got drink written all over it. And Elko said that afterwards. Because
did
how
he
in the
reverse gaslight his own player?
Yes. How in the world?
We said 0 catches.
There's no way that A&M would have had access to the individual rooms that all of those Mizzou players were staying in. I guarantee you. I would be stunned if that was actually something that A&M did. And then credit Theo Weiss for like coming out with the blanket like draped around him. I thought that was kind of cool. A little fun back and forth. We need some of that in college football. We need some of that. But yeah, there was no doubt in my mind like A&M got the last laugh and Mizzou
the first, the second.
Oh man,
the second to last.
Poor Mizzou fans. ESPN cameras did them dirty with some of the shots that we were seeing of Mizzou fans just after A&M touchdowns, looking like they wanted to be literally anywhere else but Kyle Field on that Saturday because it was a whomping.
In the preview, I literally said, Mizzou, please be serious. I just want you. This is a game that you just have to win if you're serious. And I'm not even just trying to be mean. I think we saw what you see in Mizzou. We saw the best punt I think I've ever seen in my life at a Texas A&M. They did everything better than Mizzou.
That pylon cam of the punt was beautiful. I'm not saying that Iowa fans would watch that on repeat for the next decade, but I think they would have rather watched that probably than what happened against Ohio State. I know that for certain. Let's talk about the A&M side. Conner Weigman stand up.
You almost sold your boy out.
We did it.
I talked you back from that ledge. He was the man for the job. He's a king, bro.
I'm not standing when I say this, but you're right. He is the man for the job. I was pleased, very pleased, and a bit surprised to see Mike Elko make a move that I don't know if all defensive-minded coaches would have made. I expected him to stick with Marcel Reed because I think he's been really secure with the football. I think the A&M running game has been really solid. And above all else, A&M was 3-0 with him as the starter. And if you're a year one coach, you're not worried about like, if I start the younger guy, am I going to, worry about this guy transferring? Like, no, you got time to figure that stuff out. Just kind of go, it's working. But A&M didn't have 12-team playoff upside with this version of Marcel Reed. Okay.
Yep.
And I think they started to see that. They had the worst passing attack in the SEC coming into this game. And that's with Reed getting the majority of the starts. I'm not trying to, take away from what he did because to step in and do the things he did, I think he definitely exceeded my expectations, no doubt about it. But Weigman gets the start, which seemed to surprise Mizzou. Drink was pretty adamant.
Many things seemed to surprise Mizzou.
Right? I mean, Drink was pushing some buttons in this pregame because he came out and said like he thought that Reed was going to be the starter. Maybe it's a little bit of gamesmanship on his part to try and make it seem like they were preparing for one thing. They're preparing for both. Whatever the case, it backfired. Mizzou looked like it was legitimately surprised that Conner Weigman was the starting quarterback in this game. And maybe they were. That game showed exactly why I have been so vocal about Conner Weigman. It was everything encapsulated. And you could look at some of the raw numbers and be like, he didn't have a single touchdown pass. Or
I was about to say, this is the greatest quarter performance I've ever seen without a touchdown.
Yeah, didn't have one touchdown.
I'm not kidding. He looked amazing for every second of this game. He was 18 of 22. It just happened like they just punched in all their touchdowns.
He was in total control. Total control. Over 12 yards per attempt, only 4 completions. But like that was the thing. You saw the next level throws from him, and everything felt like it was in play. And everything that Colin Klein was dialing up was working. And maybe part of that was because of, what Jordan brought up on the broadcast about the lack of pressure that Mizzou was applying. I don't know. Like, I haven't said a lot of nice things about Corey Batoon, more so because of the situation that he inherited, the circumstances, not necessarily about indictment of his scheme or anything like that. But Corey Batoon in this game opted to really not send much pressure on Conner Weigman, even though Notre Dame had Weigman seeing ghosts.
Yep.
And for whatever the case, for whatever reason, we saw Mizzou play this very passive defensive style that we would have never seen under Blake Baker, because they were the most blitz happy team in the country last year. And instead in this game, they're like, you know what? We need to have guys in the secondary. And Weigman just picked them apart. I mean, absolutely picked them apart. They really could not stop much of anything. And you just saw it all from him. Like, you saw the next level throws, the mobility, the ability to work through his progressions. Targeted like 10 different receivers in this game too. That's always a good sign, in my opinion, when he's not just locking into one guy, not just locking into Noah Thomas, who I love the player that guy's becoming. He's really kind of emerging as like a go-to. He's maybe not there quite yet, but some of the stuff that he's doing in a post-Evan Stewart world after the catch is really special and something that they really need. But this is the type of game that Mike Elko hoped for. And I had reached out to someone close to the program as my mind was wandering late on a Friday night going, am I crazy to want to see Conner Weigman on Saturday? And I was confirmed that I was not crazy, because, buddy, we saw the best version of him. And to me, it makes A&M a different team when they're doing things like that. And obviously some of that's on Mizzou, and they just couldn't find the answers. But and by the way, Le'Veon Moss, super encouraged by what we've seen from him. He's emerging as one of the better backs in the SEC, which they needed him to be with some of their backfield depth issues. It felt like a first down or a touchdown drive that he was finishing off every time he touched the football. That guy has played outstanding so far, and they have legitimate balance. They have an identity, and I was so encouraged by that. But, I didn't sell the Conner Weigman stock. Still had it. We're feeling better about it. Feeling much better about it after week 6.
This is a gentleman that you legitimately sold me on. Like, I'm not even like, bravo to you, because, like, I think it was a little bit early because he was, Jimbo was just a disaster. But I always remember, like, you talking about, like, this guy's actually pretty good. Like, I don't think it's time to move on from this guy yet. And, like, we saw it. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think you're right about Mizzou's defense. I think not just Blake Baker, who is kind of a linebacker centric guy, but Kevin Peoples, I think, is an underrated loss for them.
Good point.
Who is basically like a pass rush / edge rusher guy. You could see him at LSU, and that LSU's edge rushers are now way better. It's the same gentleman we saw last year stinking up the joint. And so, like, that's the thing. It's like, yeah, you lose Baker, who would turn around the defense, obviously, from Wilkes, but you lose both of the guys who are kind of bringing the boom on the defensive side. And when you change your identity like that, it's just so hard in a game like this. And man, I am terrified of Texas A&M. We kind of talked about this at V today, so I was like, those coaches with this money, I don't like that. They shouldn't be, like, I was kind of like bullish on them in year 1, but like I remember we like kind of talked about like, A&M every show. Year 2 and 3,
rounding into form already.
Uh-oh.
Nick Scorton rounding into form. They just don't make him like that. I know we already talked about him. I mean, he was so good in this game that we talked about him with Tennessee breakdown. But look, they just don't make him like that. And they don't even make him like that in College Station, where he grew up, because he had to go to Purdue and, hit the strength program, hit the Billy Napier muscle added program. And he became that guy at Purdue. And now in this Mike Elko defense, with so many guys up front that you have to account for, he is blossoming into a special, special player. That pressure matchup, I mean, Mizzou had no chance to stop A&M. It felt like every time Brady Cook couldn't hit his first read, it was a scramble or a sack. It was like what Nico experienced at Arkansas. And the A&M team that we saw on Saturday took advantage of Mizzou's weaknesses and dominated in a way that, look, I think the last time we saw A&M play a game that impressive was 2022 regular season finale against LSU.
All right, man.
Sorry. You had a bye week, Will. Everybody got digs in week 6. All right. You need to get some too. You know what? But I mean, is that a fair point? Has A&M looked that good in a game since? And we're gonna get to the Mizzou part of this in a second here, and obviously that's a big part of the equation. But that was more impressive than any game they played last year and so far in this year.
And mind you, like, when we did the pregame, I said, look, Mizzou, you can't let A&M pass you. And Unfortunately, I believe that's what we're witnessing. And the reason for it, man, look at the amount of not just like individual guys and position groups within Texas A&M that you hit on it, starting with the Notre Dame game, have just gotten better every week. Talking about the run game with Le'Veon Moss, the quarterback position as a whole, right? You can see these guys that have come in, scored. Terry Bussey, like the guys that they've brought in, it's like they started. I understand A&M's always at the money when I get like I've been saying that I said A&M is the one team I can make fun of whenever because they're rich and they can always figure it out. The specific gentlemen that A&M has brought in, the young guys, the transfers, the decisions they have make, watch them because they're getting better every week. And it's like some type of a space alien organism that's just evolving in front of our eyes. And I'm like, their protection is getting better. Their coverage is getting better. They're like, it's
Scheme's
weird.
Better. Yeah.
Dude, that's the crazy thing. And against Notre Dame, it's really, we kind of talked about it as like a pick 'em game, but Notre Dame just had a little bit more runway. And we saw that they obviously are not a great team losing to IU, but they just needed time. This team was always in there. They just couldn't do that week one. And this coaching staff, man, like I said, like watching Elko on the sidelines, man. He's like one of those like alt metal bassists that never talks and wears glasses. He's like, you got to get out of the pit when those guys start playing. He's scary. He's a tactician. You don't know what's going on between those ears. You got to get out of there, man.
Will, does any coach, now that Saban's gone, does any coach on the sideline drop a better F-bomb than Mike Elko? I mean, that guy is more on camera, just loud F-bombs at all times.
He's
and I've always
cool, man, dude. And Colin Clark, oh my gosh, sorry, I like this team. It's bothering me. I liked Alabama last week. Now I like A&M. This is just a likable A&M team.
You got Nick Scorton's dad rocking his NS chain in the stands, front row, showing it off. Like I definitely tweeted that out. Nick Scorton's dad tweeted at me afterwards. And was
That's the American dream right there.
But
that's my American dream.
It made me realize when Claire's playing sports one day, I need to get like a CEO chain and just be rocking it.
Oh,
I mean, show it to the camera. Yeah.
Start putting away the fund right now to get that made.
We need to make that. We need to start saving for that now. Start saving for college or whatever. But more importantly, start saving for the chain that says CEO that I can wear to all of her sporting events one day.
There you go.
We'll get there.
If she gets the athletic scholarship, that's when you dump that money into the chain. There you go.
Is it weird to have a chain for a long snapper? That's socially acceptable, right? Fine.
World's yours, Connor.
Exactly. A&M's going to have legit playoff life going into November. Here's why, Will. That might sound ambitious to say in the first week of October, but they have a bye, and then they're at Mississippi State, and then home against LSU. That's the rest of October's slate for this team. And I'm not sitting here saying that A&M is absolutely a playoff team, but they're 3-0 in SEC play, and they might only be an underdog twice the rest of the season. The game against LSU and then home against Texas.
There's obviously some funny potential losses on the table for Brian Kelly, ladies and gentlemen, because I just keep seeing LSU in these schedules of these teams, and I'm like, uh-oh.
Well, with A&M showing what it did on Saturday, I'm getting more and more excited for Texas and Texas A&M, the rivalry renewed. That is now looking like it's going to be better and better, and it's great. And Mike Elko, look, even if he doesn't end up having playoff life in that game, we don't judge year one coaches on this show. We don't do that, even though we said some not so nice things about Kalen DeBoer. I just love so many of the personal moves.
Lose to Vanderbilt, we will laugh at you. That's the truism.
Fair. Okay? That is the disqualifier.
That's a fact. Bama fans, you would have said the same thing on Friday. All right?
You are not immune if you lose to Vandy. Everything is on the table for you. But just a really nice response for A&M after the Notre Dame loss. We got to talk about Mizzou. Let's talk about the team that needed a last-minute field goal to hit 10 points. They hit the over on that. Drink was definitely like, might as well hit the over. Drink and Kiffin are the two most Vegas-aware coaches, I think. It certainly seems like it.
They hate how much like each other they are. That's the thing.
Drink, I've always said I think Drink wants to be a lot more like Kiffin than he probably actually is. And I've seen those two interact behind the scenes to kind of confirm that. But we can say that for a different time. Mizzou had the offseason mantra, STP. Luther Burden III said it a bunch at SEC Media Days. I forgot at the time what it stood for, but I remembered soon thereafter. Something improved. That was the mantra. That is how you and I felt, and I'm sure many others felt about Mizzou entering Saturday. Something to prove. 4-0, but something to prove if we're going to include Mizzou in these 12-team playoff conversations. Mizzou had everything to prove. Not something to prove, everything to prove. And instead, all it did was go out there and confirmed all of that skepticism. It was sloppy. It was undisciplined. It was vulnerable in some very key areas. And yes, I'm going to acknowledge those 2 calls early. Mizzou fans, you've been waiting for me to say this entire breakdown. I'll say it for you right now. I thought the 4th down pass attempt to Theo Weiss on that first drive was definitely DPI. And even if it wasn't a non-target throw, I thought it was perfectly clear that it was DPI. And the fact that SEC officials waved that off after initially calling it, I thought was a baffling decision. And it probably changes the complexion of that game early on. That gets like that would have me so irate on the road in that spot. And I get why there was total frustration if you're a Mizzou fan, if you're Eli Drinkwitz. I don't blame Mizzou for being irate that Luther Burden III's 75-yard touchdown got wiped off the board because of an offensive lineman blocking 4 yards downfield. I don't blame Mizzou for being really upset with that. I couldn't believe it when that got taken off the board. That felt like, remember the Titans, just toss out a flag at the start of the play. There's nothing that Mizzou's going to be able to do right. Everything SEC officiating is going against their way, and I am usually not that guy. That play kind of felt like that, and I realize that play gets called sometimes. It doesn't get called all the time, and that's why it felt like it was just not going to be.
And that game very much felt back and forth at that point. Like I think it was like 10-14 or something.
No,
like
it was 10-0 at that point. That would have made it 10-7.
There we go. Yeah, it put it in 3. Yep.
I don't blame Luther Burden for getting upset when he got to the sideline. Okay? But him being so upset that he couldn't even be out there for the rest of the series in a 10-0 game was bad. And you would hope that your best player is the steadying force for your team, and Luther Burden was not. He has not been that guy for this team this season. Just too many unhinged moments from him. Yep. And I had Luther Burden as the number 1 player in the SEC coming into this season. Yep. And I think he has been disappointing in that regard. And he's just played too much on edge, and it's cost Mizzou at some of these times. I mean, even Drink laid into him in that Vandy game for the penalties that he was having. You're just like, man, I know you play with this fire, but you have to be better. You have to be more mature, because after that sequence, and then it turns into 3rd and 20 and they can't pick it up, the game was over because A&M marches down the field, scores right away. It's 17-0, and Mizzou's day is done. It's absolutely done. Mizzou was not good enough to come back from that on the road. We know that. But this looks like a team that lacks leadership, and they lack the juice that they had last year as this underdog that can handle an opening punch on the road, like what we saw Mizzou do in that Kentucky game last year, where they fell behind. All of a sudden, it was the fake punt that gets them going in that game. They don't have that this year. I don't know what Mizzou's identity is. They don't know what their identity is. And a part of that is because, quite frankly, Brady Cook has not been particularly good this year. It's not all of it, but it's part of it. I don't know if he's dealing with an injury right now that he's not disclosing, or if he's just not as good of a player, but he's just not been as good. It's simple. There was a ball that he had in the seam to Theo Weiss that looked like it was perfectly schemed from my 1-1 SEC offensive coordinator draft pick, Kirby Moore, who I'm not going to let off the hook. But it was a nicely schemed play, and it was just a foot away from what would have been a touchdown. And Brady Cook looked like he thought that he was going to turn it to the middle of the field a little bit, and Weiss kind of stayed to the outside to avoid the safety. It's just been like that all year, where it's just off. I tweeted this out, and I'm interested in your take on this. Quarterbacks in the SEC that I would take over Brady Cook right now. Quinn Ewers. Yep.
Yeah.
Arch Manning. Yep. Jalen Milroe. Even after Vandy. Still yep. Carson Beck. Yes. Garrett Nussmeier. Absolutely. Nico Yamaliava. Even after Saturday. Absolutely. Jackson Dart. Yep. Conner Weigman.
Yeah.
Yes. Graham Mertz. Yes.
Oh, man. Oh, that was a cliff right there.
DJ Lagway. Yes.
Oh, man. Come on. You think Florida has 2 better quarterbacks than Brady Cook?
Buddy, Vandy's got a better quarterback than Brady Cook.
Okay, but no, come on now.
It's Diego Pavia's world.
Come on now.
Yeah. All right. That's 11 guys. Before we even get to Taylon Green, before we even get to Brock Vandagriff, who, look, I realize Brock Vandagriff has struggled a lot.
Yeah.
Brock Vandagriff's got a better win than I think Brady Cook's going to have all year. I'll say that. That's a problem. Brady Cook has gone from a top 10 quarterback in America to maybe not even a top 10 quarterback in the SEC. And when you don't have a defense that's capable of doing the heavy lifting like it did at times last year, or a Cody Schrader, because Nate Noel's a nice player, Marcus Carroll, nice player. They're not Cody Schrader. This is why Mizzou is looking like the team that we have seen. Such a disappointing showing coming off of the bye week. And now, guess what? You got to go up to UMass. Good luck.
Yep. I think you just nailed that. And it was that, okay, last year, what was Mizzou? I would argue their passing offense was the third most important thing, right? Their rushing offense was more important than their passing offense, and their defense was also more important. Well, now, and we're talking about their pass rush specifically, and like the blitz-happy defense that was able to create turnovers, create negative plays when the offense was struggling, right? So you have these two stable buoys in their defense and their running game that are just kind of gone now, or not the level that they were. And we logically all deduced, okay, well, but another year of Ruther Burden, another year of Curry Moore, another year of Brady Cook, another year of that boy Weiss, like they're going to step up and overcome that stuff. And now that I'm looking back at last year's Mizzou season, I'm thinking these close games and such that we're like imagining Brady Cook making these plays in those situations were often only possible because of Cody Schrader and their defense. And without those things, we're not, and of course their kicking game last year was pretty nasty as well. And so point being, like, all of those things worked in their direction to put their passing offense in a situation where it looked like it was what we saw last year. I don't think it got worse. I think it became more critical.
I think it got worse.
I think it got worse. But you see what I'm saying? It's like it matters more that when it struggles. Because I think it always struggled, but in the big moments, we saw they had these clutch plays. But to even get to that point, so many things have to happen.
I think it's worse.
Oh, for sure. I'm not doubting that. It's just much more important.
Yeah. I mean, they get behind the six way too often, and they can't. You can't be a team that struggles to get downfield passes and be a team that falls behind and has self-induced mistakes. And the penalties have caught up to this team. And right now, like they're not part of that 12-team playoff conversation. They just aren't. And Mizzou has a lot of soul searching. But great win for A&M. A great statement win to win like that, and not have it feel fluky. Feel like you were the better team from start to finish. And yes, Mizzou fans, like, again, I get it. It's probably a different day if those two plays go your way and it's more of a 60-minute game. I still think A&M would have won that game if those two plays had gone Mizzou's way.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a different season. And I think, too, I would love to see the average distance of third down. That's a really good point between this year and last year, because that does feel like a pretty big deal, where it was kind of about a 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3 most of the time last year. This is not scientific, guys. But when you have Schrader, he can plow forward for 4 yards. You're sitting there, okay, a little dump off to that boy Weiss, hit Burden over the top because they're not expecting it. Now it's like, oh, wait, we got to have that 3rd and 8 every time. They know Luther Burden is going to hit that post route, and they're going to cover it. So we got to do 2 and 3 other things. So fascinating matchup for sure.
Yeah. All right, let's whip through these last 3 games. Not quite as eventful as the first 3 that we talked about today, but Deep South's oldest rivalry, Auburn and Georgia. Georgia fans, if you were disappointed that this wasn't the foot on the throat beatdown of Auburn that we usually see in Athens, look around.
Relax.
It was week 6, man. This day could have been so much worse. The good news for Georgia is that it keeps Auburn kind of at an arm's length, wins its 8th consecutive game in this rivalry. That's positive, and it's a bounce back win of sorts. It beats the heck out of playing a down to the wire game, which, by the way, Georgia had played in a couple of down to the wire games so far in SEC play. Georgia actually put an end to a wild stat that I wasn't aware of until they mentioned it on the broadcast. Well, Georgia had 7 consecutive SEC games in which it trailed in the first quarter, dating back to October last year against Kentucky.
Wow.
Yeah, Kentucky last year, it was the only time in that stretch where they had been able to avoid a first quarter deficit up until Saturday. No first quarter deficit. Auburn did make things interesting in the third quarter when Jarquez Hunter broke off that run to the outside. I do think, man, the issue with Georgia's defense is very evident as we near the midway point of the season. Of like just not gap disciplined. It's just not in the way that we always expect Kirby Smart teams to be. Auburn racked up 5.6 yards per rush, and that's sack adjusted, by the way. I don't know that you can just be like, oh, didn't have Smile London in this game. I don't think that you could just chalk it up to that. Georgia entered the day ranked 58th in rushing yards allowed per game, and Auburn exceeded that. Kirby said beforehand, well, I guess they technically didn't exceed that. It would have been sack adjusted where they exceeded that, but still, you get what I'm saying. Kirby said beforehand, like right as the game's about to start, I want to see my team play a complete game. I want to see them start off fast. I want to see them play complementary football. I wouldn't say Georgia checked all three of those boxes. I wouldn't. It feels nitpicky after the day that was. It does. But Georgia fans, like, you're going to agree with us on this. I know you will, even if you don't necessarily want to hear us say this. And it's better to be critical in a win than it is in a loss, a la last week. And that's why maybe there were some frustrations on the side of Georgia fans who disagreed with your assessment. But I think Carson Beck was fine in this game. He avoided the mistakes that he made last week. That's the positive for him. Ball just comes out of his hand a little weird sometimes in ways that it wasn't last year. And I always said last year, throwing over the middle between the hashes, it's automatic completion. I mentally move on that it's just they're going to be able to move the chains. This year, not there. Even that touchdown pass to Tom Lovett looked like Dylan Bell just let it go. I don't know how, and didn't go up and try and catch it. Maybe he saw too much zip on it, and he's like, surely this football can't be for me. And it goes to Tom Lovett instead, and it's a touchdown. But just a little bit strange. And, well, what does Georgia do best at this point? What's the number one strength? It's not stuff perimeter runs. Mm-hmm. It's not impose their will at the line of scrimmage. Mm-hmm. It's not get after the quarterback. It's not turn to this alien named Brock Bowers to save the day. And it's not like, hey, we're going to have everyone deal with Trevor Etienne, who's a nice player, but he hasn't been a take over the game guy for most of his career, with the exception maybe like that Tennessee game last year.
He's just never going to take the workload, right? Like, I mean, this is about as good a game as you can have from like a carry standpoint. He has 16 carries, right? Like, he's never going to be one of these like Mizzou backs or like
that's fine.
Swift. Yeah, right.
That's but
the problem. When you don't exactly know your identity, those guys are nice to have, you know?
Yeah. It would be nice if they could say like, all right, Trevor, take it 24 times this game. Right. And that hasn't been necessarily that they can been something that they can fall back on. It's a bounce back win, and that's the good news. But up to the Georgia standard, I wouldn't say it was.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that we both expected this to be more of kind of a beatdown. It was a little bit closer. Auburn, those guys are just living in a treehouse of horrors, man. I mean, the field goal that got blocked, that was like would have cut it within one score, got right before halftime. It's like I'm literally watching them go, well, one thing I can count on Auburn for usually is kicking a special team. Nope. And
Magoo.
So like
no. Alex Magoo. Oh boy.
It's like the funniest name to be struggling.
Is it Alex? No, it's Towns. It's Towns.
Magoo.
I mixed up Alex McPherson and Towns Magoo. My bad. Auburn fans, I'll be better.
Magoo. Yeah. Like anyway. So point being, like, obviously great play by Georgia to stop that, but it's like Auburn did keep it close in the first half. That field goal, don't think it would have won them the game or really markedly changed anything because they're still Auburn. But point being, yeah, I'm with you. I'm saying this like completely legitimately. I think I've like. The last 2 years, 2022 and 2023, I have said, I'm not exactly sure who the guys are in Georgia this year in terms of the difference makers, but they will appear to be. I'm not worried about it. I believe I probably, and even talking to Georgia fans, gave them a little bit too much credit in that respect because those guys have just not appeared this year so far. I think that's probably a fair way to say it when it comes to, like we always talked about, like the talent who's going to emerge from this, recruiting class or from these guys we've been hearing about on the boards, who's going to be a real life football player. It's hard to say it. I think your question of, what are they good at is interesting, right? Because again, I think the passing game, the receivers are a little bit weak. I don't know. I'm still waiting to see what the best version of this team is or really what they're trying to be. And like, I'm right there with you. And they're still a good football team. Don't get me wrong. And in this year, like, that's all you can really hope to be, right? There's maybe Ohio State's great. Maybe Texas is great. Maybe. TBD. But TBD, right? And you got a game against them in the 19th. So you'll figure it out there. But they really kind of have a couple of weeks to just figure that specific thing out because that's the thing. Texas knows what they're great at, right? And so point being, like, I'm never going to say Georgia has any type of like a talent problem necessarily. Like, I'm not going to say, oh, poor Georgia. But I think they just need to use their guys a little bit differently, maybe. I really don't know. And maybe
Michael Williams was expected to be like that game changer guy. Right. Him being banged up, him getting hurt in the Clemson game, I think changed that. I don't think it's fair to just say like, oh, well, because he got hurt and he's coming back and he got to play in this game, which that's the good news for Georgia. But they still like Jalen Walker, I thought has had really, really good moments this year. He's also been a little bit.
But you said gap discipline.
Yeah.
Gap discipline is not one guy. That's the thing.
Yes.
Even
exactly.
if you have Jordan Davis and you don't have gap discipline, you can't stop the run because now they're just running away from Jordan Davis.
Agreed. I'm going to save my Auburn take for later for the preview. For next time that we talk about Auburn, because it's a little bit too big picture. I know I said that I would tease it if they lost this game. I don't really think there's anything to like really decipher for Auburn. The 4th and 1.
So you think they're out of the
playoff? Yes, confirmed out of the playoff with 4 losses.
Spoiler alert, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the 4th and 1, Hugh Freeze, Peyton Thorne miscommunication was weird. Not exactly great for the Hugh Freeze doesn't throw quarterbacks under the bus. Whatever that miscommunication was, I should have checked afterwards to see the breakdown of what it was, but they were kind of even talking about in the broadcast. They're like, I'm not sure what Hugh Freeze was really looking for in that spot there. It was supposed to be like if it was the wrong check or whatever it was, but nonetheless, this is more of what you thought. At least Peyton Thorne didn't turn the football over, I guess, but not exactly a game that makes us think anything differently of Auburn. I'm going to save that take. I want to dig into more of it later, a different date.
Deal.
So we'll do that. All right, Ole Miss, South Carolina. Love the toughness from Ole Miss. I'm gonna give Ole Miss some credit here because you get embarrassed at home against Kentucky last week to start off SEC play. Everybody's saying that was the byproduct of your schedule, the way that it started off. You're going into a hostile atmosphere, South Carolina, of course. You're without one of your best defensive players in Princely Amon Mielen. You're without your starting left tackle against that pass rush. They get 32 seconds in the game, they get a holding call, and it's against Dylan Stewart. Dylan Stewart just looks like he's getting mugged. And they're like, I tweeted out, I'm like, this is going to be a long day for that Ole Miss offensive line. And even Trey Harris leaves in the middle of the second quarter of this game. Still, of course, like got 85 receiving yards or something like that, 81, whatever it was. So Jackson Dart couldn't just lock in on Trey Harris, so he had to find other options. The Juice Wells game, I should have brought that up in the preview pod, but the revenge game, I guess, of sorts, whatever it was. South Carolina was probably the one that had more of a right to seek revenge against Juice Wells. Judas Wells, as Nick Emanwari called him.
You can't boo a guy with the name Juice, though, because it just sounds like you're saying Juice.
Yeah, that's a good point.
On a page like
that's a good point. Really good point. But how about that toughness from Ole Miss? How about that toughness? Because they were able to respond in ways that, look, maybe getting humbled last week kind of set the stage for that. That game was never in doubt after the failed fake punt attempt by South Carolina.
Yep.
When they didn't convert that, Ole Miss took advantage early, and it was kind of all she wrote. That was not a perfect game from Ole Miss, but it was exactly the type of game that you could have hoped for because J.J. Pegues got in the end zone twice, and he made a little jump cut. J.J. Pegues at Wildcat quarterback is...
He got the zoomies. He was like Rudy.
Oh, I love it. I love it so much. I feel bad for your boy Ulysses Bentley that he's not getting that goal line work, but man, seeing J.J. Pegues out there is so much better. We're going to have a lot more thoughts on that this week. Little tease for the people. But this defensive line for Ole Miss, we talked about it so much in the offseason. It is the difference for this team. It is. And Pegues is obviously part of that when he's, obviously not moonlighting as a Wildcat quarterback. But Ivy and Nolan have been so good, so freaking good. Ole Miss had 6 sacks in this game, 10 TFLs against the South Carolina offense that just did not find any answers coming out of the bye week. First time in the last 9 years that Ole Miss has allowed 3 or fewer points in a conference game. I really liked what we saw from them in that atmosphere. It was kind of good that it wasn't just like, oh, they're scheming things open left and right, and it's this game that it feels like kind of, they're not necessarily punching you in the mouth. Ole Miss punched South Carolina in the mouth.
Yep.
And that's as good of a sign as you could have asked for if you were an Ole Miss fan.
Connor, the headline, like for the ESPN story, because I always go through the stats on here, is 325-pound J.J. Pegues runs for 2 touchdowns as number 12 Ole Miss post 27-3 win over South Carolina.
Beautiful.
Incredible lead to that
He's on pace for 8 touchdowns this year, Will.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I will say this, like, seriously and legitimately. This was an incredible response by Ole Miss. South Carolina, the environment was great. They showed up ready to play. They tried a little bit of Beamer ball. I think there were a couple of kind of head scratching calls early by Beamer. I feel like if you're going to go for it, you should just go for it. They did a fake punt that Ole Miss just was kind of pointing at, what are you doing here? I think if you got kind of the stones to do that, you need to just walk your quarterback out there and do it. And to their credit, they tried that. That didn't work either. Got sacked by Walter Nolan, so maybe it just wasn't in the cards for them. That's fine. But all I want to say there is like, this is like, whenever a team loses and they have a hard day, like, I want to just take a picture of this, because I've heard so many times from people, or you kind of think to yourself, what were we supposed to do? That was just like their day. South Carolina, game flow wise, environment wise, all that was set up, was prepared to make this into a 4-quarter game, and almost just decided it was not going to be that.
Yep.
And it's pretty rare that we see, because I'm like a guy who like always evaluates like success. Like, it's not like about the scoreboard or about like stats. It's really just about like, who is like, how are the game plans working against each other? Who is finding success on a given play? And if you're talking about a South Carolina team that had more first downs, they had 300 yards of offense. This was not a team that rolled over and died the way that the final score would suggest. And it almost is a disservice to Ole Miss to act like it was. Like, they just came in there and stomped them. Like, no, like, South Carolina was ready to play. Like, they were making plays early. They were bold. They were going for these 4th downs. Ole Miss, to your point, holding calls, struggling early. This is the exact type of stuff that, with you look at the pairing of Lane Kiffin and Jackson Dart, you go, I need these guys to grit in and just kind of be SEC guys. Like, I need them to just take the punch. Yeah, exactly. Like, I need them to just take the punch in the mouth and go, okay, I got punched in the mouth. I'm going to punch you back, and just pretend like that didn't happen, and not just go, oh. And like, that's kind of the vibe we got last week, where they was just a little bit too tough for them. This is the thing you love to see as an Ole Miss fan, because it's a game that could have been a trap game. They were beat up after last week. It was a rough week. They were reading the press clippings. I was actually really impressed by this one from Ole Miss.
I knew that South Carolina was cooked on Saturday morning, Will.
Why is that?
Claire and I were at the park.
Okay.
Hogging the swings, as she does. Little boy comes over. Really similar age to Claire. It's weird how you like kind of get that sense of, oh, like I all of a sudden can pick out like, oh yeah, the kid's probably like 2 or 2.5 or something like that. And Claire's 16 months, but I think this kid was like really similar in age. He's wearing a South Carolina jersey. Both parents are there. I say they get kind of close, and I say something like, oh, South Carolina's got a big one today. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll see. Definitely didn't expect Ole Miss to look like that last week. I could not have gotten less confidence from these people. Bad omen for the Gamecocks.
They should have been more cocky.
Chef's kiss, Will. Chef's kiss. Even worse omen for their son, who probably wanted to go on the swings, but Claire wasn't getting off for anyone, and so they were going to get bullied.
She was the Walter Nolan of the swings.
She was the JJ Pegues of the swings as well. She's doing it all. Yeah, not great. All right, let's close out. UCF, Florida. Well, there are 124 miles that separate UCF and Florida. Will's cackling right now. I wish the listening audience could see this.
I've been trying not to laugh. Like, my face, if you watch the YouTube, my face has just been histrionic. So I'm trying to not laugh right into the microphone this whole podcast. That one got me. Continue.
124 miles separating these two campuses. Mm-hmm. And I know that because not only do I live in Orlando, but 3 years ago, UCF took out a billboard in Gainesville and said, the future of college football, with a photoshopped Gus Malzahn on it, because that was before Gus Malzahn had coached a game at UCF. I don't know if UCF is going to come anywhere close to living up to that. I don't. But I do know that Florida treated that UCF rushing attack like it was from 1950. It did. Just a remarkable out-of-nowhere response by the Gators out of the bye week to hold UCF to just 145 sack-adjusted rushing yards. Biggest obvious mismatch coming into this game. I mean, number 2 rushing attack in FBS, and against the Florida rushing defense that had allowed, 240 yards to Mississippi State, and unbelievable performance by that group. Game flow probably helped with the fast start that Florida got off to, a 24-3 halftime lead. Just the exact opposite of the situation that UCF wanted to be in, but they came back against TCU, so shouldn't necessarily dismiss that idea. But I need to give Florida credit for beating an FBS team in the swamp for the first time in a year, and not focused on the fact that Florida had 0 second half points and kind of struggled to maintain the offensive juice that they had early on. But it beats the heck out of the alternative. Yep. Instead, Florida gets a winning streak. I'm still not convinced that they're going to be able to slow down the run against better ground attacks in the SEC, which sounds probably a bit hypocritical because they just did against the number 2 rushing attack in college football. But how's it going to look like against some of these better offensive line groups? They're going to see one against Tennessee. I still think Tennessee has one of the best rushing attacks in college football. But But that was exactly what Florida could have hoped for coming out of the bye. And they said something on the broadcast about how they were like keeping score in practice during drills, and Napier hadn't done that before.
Okay.
Hasn't Urban been doing that forever? Like,
I'm glad they're aware there's a score to this whole thing we're doing here in Gatesville.
They made it seem like it was like a revolutionary concept, and I was like, oh God. Right. Did I just get more ammo in the Billy file of like this guy didn't have as deep of a plan as I thought? I don't want that to overshadow Florida taking care of business against UCF, a game in which they were an underdog. All right, they're a home underdog against the team that you just can't lose to from an optics standpoint, and Florida didn't, and that is such great news. Does Florida have a shot to go into Knoxville?
They'll go into Knoxville.
They're going to go into Knoxville.
They'll be in Knoxville.
They will physically be in Knoxville. We know nothing if Florida goes into Knoxville and beats Tennessee. Like, we'll just have to throw out everything we were saying from September. That's how crazy the season has already been. Yeah,
I'm right there with you. I think. I mean, yeah, this is this is all serious. Kind of a statement at this point in Billy's career, right? Because we all picked it. I mean, talked about the rushing offense. I mean, hey, say what you will. KJ Jefferson and RJ Harvey, hard to tackle. Like, confirmed, hard to tackle. This is a KJ Jefferson who, with Arkansas last year, marched into the swamp and beat them for the first time ever. This is true Arkansas football. He has a chance. I love like college football stats because they're so impossible to track down. It's like the broadcast. They're like, yeah, it's something that not a lot of players have done. Go to the same stadium twice and win in like consecutive years.
Different team.
We'll just bury it. Just because like who has the opportunity to do that? Maybe like one of the Hurricane
good point.
LSU games, like because you just don't play the team at the same at their place, you know. So point being, like, yeah, I like we saw this player in Arkansas who was not way more talented than UCF last year, you know, walk in there and get off to a hot start. And you're right, this time Florida got off to a hot start, partially weird goal line fade call by Gus. Gosh, I love Gus. It's
a bad Gus game.
Really that was a bad Gus game, man. Oh. And like not to do this thing, but I saw his buyout number, which is $12 million, which the stuff that we talk about is way higher than that. But for UCF, that might as well be Jimbo at this point in their situation. So they're kind of like stuck behind. They're now exactly where Auburn was, like kind of trying to, okay, now we see where you guys are at with Gus. Pretty rough. But yeah, it was either going to be a good Gus game or a bad Gus game, right? This was a bad Gus game. I think that Billy, I think they did what they needed to do, to your point. I mean, didn't do great in the second half, but they really poured it on early. I think Graham Mertz looked honestly awesome. Boy, Ted Roof is still coaching football, huh?
Yeah, Ted Roof. They got him out of Oklahoma, but they couldn't get him out of college football as a whole, man.
They should.
I
think he should just go spend time with his family.
They miss Travis Williams just a little bit. They miss John Rice Plumlee, and I say that as a KJ appreciator, but they miss John Rice Plumlee. They really do. I think they would have had a better chance in that game if John Rice Plumlee is their quarterback. Which I saw some tweets going around about that as well, and I was having that thought watching that. And I love John Rice Plumlee, so that's not necessarily a big time shot at KJ, but yeah, Florida, great response because you were dead in the water. You were dead in the water, and you've won consecutive games against core 4 teams, and that's a good thing. If you win against Tennessee, you have a chance to change the entire complexion of this season, and that's the good news. And you feel like you actually can turn to some positivity and not just blind hope. That's a huge positive for Florida right now.
Hey, you know, the big 3 or the big 4, right? We talked about that as of right. No. Sorry, in Florida they have like big 3 Twitter.
Oh yeah.
I'm so rot brained about this stuff. I talk to these people so often, and so like the whole thing is there's like big 3 Twitter, and the UCF is like, no, it's big 4 Twitter, and they like all go back and forth. And so point being, hey, like genuinely as a Florida fan right now, you look around and go, hey, really only Miami is kind of convincingly better than us. And I don't even think that's that convincing at this point. We know we're better than FSU right now. We've got that figured out. We know we're better than UCF. So hey, this is not a disaster now.
Oh, gosh. How about
I'm
Florida?
Serious.
I know. I mean, it could be so much worse. How about Florida tweeting after this game? I'm pulling up the tweet right now where Florida tweets out like the meme of like what the UCF logo, refer to us as UCF, not Central Florida, and then Florida, I don't think about you at all. Yep. You get to play that card. You earn bragging rights in the state of Florida. All right. Let's wrap it up, Will. That was a meaty pod. Holy cow. We're going to have maybe a little bit of a rotating schedule depending on this hurricane.
There's another hurt?
Oh, buddy. It's bad. And it's going like straight at Orlando. Not good.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we'll keep people posted if we have to change the schedule. But please, if you have not, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch every episode of the Starting Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Set Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.